Hello chess fans, in today's video I'm going to show you a setup that you can play against the Sicilian to win quickly. So first off, I'm going to go over what the setup looked like, and then I'm going to show you two illustrative games where I played this setup and managed to win in less than 20 moves. So the setup starts with e4, and the setup is against the Sicilian, so our opponent plays c5. And so this is just going to be the setup part of this, so if you want to skip forward a few minutes to see the actual games in it, then you can feel free to do so. So the setup I'm going to recommend is with knight c3, g3, bishop g2, d3, f4, and h3. So what does this look like? Let's just say our opponent wastes a bunch of moves with moving their knight back and forth just to show us this example. So we're going to start off with g3 to put pressure on the d5 square with our knight and our bishop. And then we're going to play knight g2 to develop and castle our king. Then we're going to play d3 to open up our bishop and generally keep the position closed. We don't really want to allow this d5 break. Knight c6, and we're going to castle. Then we're going to develop our final piece with bishop e3. And after h3, knight b8, f4, now we see some of the ideas. Basically what we're going to be trying to do in this position is push our pawns on the king side to get a nice king side attack. And maybe bring our queen to e1 to h4, maybe bring our knight to f4 after we play f5, maybe play knight d5 to trade off a knight that comes to f6. And one thing you need to know in all of these positions is one thing we absolutely cannot allow is we cannot allow black to play d5 if we have to capture. So if he has e5 and he plays d5, we're pretty much like lost at that point. So if he ever plays d5, remember we have to play e5 and keep it close. So now I'm going to go into the game in which you see the setup and you see how to play the setup like with these moves. So now I'm going to go into the games that show you where I win with this setup. So I start off with knight c3, part of the setup. My opponent plays knight c6, and I play g3, intending to get my bishop on this. So far, we're following the setup. And here, my opponent decides to play e5. So this is the first type of thing they can do. The second type of plan they can do is with g6 and bishop g7, sort of copying us. But first off, let's start with e5. So after bishop g2, I'm continuing with the setup. My opponent plays knight f6, which is a small error, but at this point, we're just following the setup. So I play knight g2, following the setup. This is another good move. The engine says it's inaccuracy, but it's not really an inaccuracy. So I play castle. My opponent castles as well. And it's move 6 at this point. Did you know the game is going to be over in 7 moves? My opponent will have resigned the game. That's how dominant this setup is. So here I play d3, opening up my bishop, and continue to follow the setup that I've told you guys. My opponent plays bishop c7, and I play h3. I'm continuing with this setup, and the idea of h3 is simply to push my pawns on the king side and make my opponent scared. As we can see, he doesn't really have anything on the queen side here. The queen side is pretty empty, and he doesn't have anything in the center, as if he plays d5, he'd lose a pawn. So my opponent really doesn't have any plans here. So he plays a6, intending to expand here. I play bishop e3, developing my final piece. Notice that I played h3 first, because if I go bishop e3 right away, he might be able to kick me away with knight g4. And I didn't want to allow that, so I played h3 first, and then I went here. And my opponent played b6, wanting to develop his bishop, and I finished the setup with f4. So now we have literally the exact same setup I've showed you guys, and from this just takes 4 more moves until my opponent has lost the game. He develops his final piece, and here I play f5. And so most people will tell you to keep the tension in the center, but here actually to attack our opponent's king, we have to break the center, because as we can see, he has no breaks on the queen side. If he breaks in the center, he loses a pawn, so he can't break anywhere. So the only thing he can really do is take here. So I get rid of that chance for him, and now my idea is to play g4, g5, and scare his king and knight away. Here he plays knight d4, intending to trade pieces and activate his knight, and I play g4. I'm immediately going for the kill. And here my opponent got so scared, he actually managed to blunder the game in basically one move. He played g6. A general rule, don't move pawns in front of your king unless you have to when you're getting attacked. Often people do this, but this is not a very good idea. And so here I actually just have a tactic that immediately wins the game. I went bishop h6, he went rook e8, and I pinned his knight. And notice after I take here, there's going to be 2 attackers on this knight, and nobody can defend this knight except for the queen. So my opponent tried to play king g7 to get his king to defend it, but after f takes, he actually just resigned the game here on his own move, because if he takes back, then he loses his queen. He loses his queen like this. So this was just a really quick example of how you absolutely annihilate the Sicilian with e5 in this setup I recommended you. So now I'm going to show you another game I played in which I just managed to punish my opponent for playing a quick d5. Also, another thing to notice in this game is I never at any point allowed him to play d5. This is an important thing to notice. If your opponent is allowed to play d5, he might be better because he has more pawns in the center. So as you can see, I never allowed d5, and I just attacked him. So now I'm going to look at a game I played in the same opening in which my opponent tried to play an early d5. So let's immediately cut to the start with our bishop g3, or sorry, g3 and bishop g2. He plays bishop g6. So in this time, he plays the fianchetto setup, which is the other setup they can go for. He plays knight f6, intending to play d5 in some positions, and I castle. Here I'm continuing to follow the setup, castles, and I play d3. And here, more so the idea is, instead of pushing the pawns on the king side, we can't really do that because he also has the bishop here to defend. So instead, we'll like to play f4 and f5 to immediately go for this. And then ideas include things like playing knight f4 and like pushing this pawn maybe and going with a queen to h4 and a bishop here. Or a knight to g3 after we push this. I guess actually you can also push this in these positions. But here my opponent goes for a d5. And as you can see, I have 1, 2, 3 attackers, and he has 1, 2 defenders. And as you know, you need at least the same amount of defenders as attackers, so it seems weird that he would do this. But the idea was, after I took the pawn, he played here to attack this again. And let's say I play a nonchalant move like a3. After here, my opponent is just better. He has more a pawn in the center. He has more active pieces. This bishop is sad. This knight is also sad. And if I take, he'll just have a lot better of a position. So instead of that, I played knight e4, the best move in the position, simply attacking the loose pawn on c5. And notice he can't take, because after takes, I'll have the 2 pawns in the center, and here I'll be up a pawn. So my opponent took here, and after I take here, we've kind of completed the opening, actually, and here I'm just simply up a pawn. My opponent is just down a pawn. As you can see, I have 7 pawns, he has 6, and there's nothing really he can do. As you can see in the game, he fought, but after like a long struggle, after around 50 moves or so, I managed to convert my pawn advantage. Here, I didn't really get a big attack because I decided that I didn't need to get a big attack to win this game. And after knight f4, he blundered his knight to a simple tactic, which is queen e5. So that's the end of today's video, guys. If you liked the video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. And I hope you maybe link down below your games in this, because I would love to see any games you have in the closed Sicilian, because it's, I think, a great weapon against Sicilian. So yeah, thanks you guys for watching. See you guys in the next video.